addressed is Charles Gardner.
My comments are on the next topic.
All right. Then, does the council have any further comments on this topic before we move on? Would you like to take up near-term actions, Mr. Chair, or the science report?
I think we ought to do near-term actions if that's acceptable. Mr. Linsky?
Go ahead.
Somewhere. And Cindy, you're staying here for that one too,
here.
right? Members, thank you very much, members of the panel. Appreciate that. Members, this is item 7C in your packet. Item 7C, behind some of these goldenrod papers here. So the staff report is titled 7C. It's the first item of several exhibits related to it. Ms. Messer.
Okay. So obviously Carl has joined me up here, and we're going to go ahead and tag team this presentation. And please bear with me, I have a cold today. What I want to do is take, again, a half step backwards and just remind everybody why it is we have this particular item in our meeting packet and why we've been talking about it for about the last 5 council meetings now. And then quickly go over what's in this report. Part of it you've seen already several times now, and then we've added some new elements, which is what we'd like to focus on today. So the reason why we are having this discussion is, obviously, there's been a lot of attention, a lot of focus on the Delta Plan, on the BDCP. These are long-term planning efforts, looking at the next 50 to 100 years. But we face a crisis in this area, as the legislature has told us, in terms of water supply reliability, declining ecosystem, endangered species, and preservation of Delta's place that need to be addressed in the near term. So, and what we mean by near term in this discussion is the next 5 to 10 years. In addition, there's been a lot of momentum that's been building in terms of the need to take action now to move beyond planning phase. And we have our colleagues that have been participating in the Coalition for Delta Projects, in the joint effort between the California Partnership for the San Joaquin Valley and the Delta Counties Coalition, who have come up with a list of projects that they support, that they want to move forward. And we, as well as the council, have also joined in on that momentum, or building on it, and starting to take a look at what does our list look like? What do our near-term strategies entail? And so part of what we've been talking about over the last few council meetings is screening criteria. What are we going to use to evaluate near-term actions, near-term strategies that get added to our list that we move forward, as well as what are the goals and the strategies. And we haven't, up until this point, really been talking about projects and programs in details. And that is something that we have moved forward with and we provide in this staff report. And that's in direct response from many of the comments we received from the council at our last council meeting. So I'm not going to walk through, if that's okay, or read. I definitely won't be reading through the revised criteria and strategies. But I did want to mention that on page 1 and 2 of your staff report, we've listed these out. They should look very familiar. What we've done is to rework the wording, streamline them, organize them a little bit more effectively, again, in direct response to comments that we received from council members in November and at the October council meetings. What I think probably we should do is focus on the new information. And this...
I want to
sure.
just make 2 observations
Absolutely.
on the cover memo. On page 2, under your revised criteria and strategy, I think the second bullet doesn't make sense by including the no regret stuff in there. I mean, I know what, no regrets is kind of that holdover nomenclature for, a project everyone agrees to, but you've automatically tied it here to BDCP preferred, and I believe that there are people who would regret even the mention of BDCP. So it just doesn't make, didn't make sense to me.
Okay. And that one did come back in, you're right.
So I would tinker with that language a little bit. Okay. Secondly, on page 3, under protecting the Delta's place, I did not understand what diversifying the funds for levee improvements mean. The word diversifying puzzled me. Do you mean, is that share of payment? I mean, what does it mean?
I'm sorry.
Page 3,
yes.
First bullet,
okay.
line 2, diversifying.
Oh, I believe, and Carl chime in if I'm incorrect in this, but this is the assessment.
Cost sharing?
The cost sharing, and I believe it's the
Assessment district.
assessment district, sorry.
Beneficiary
I couldn't think
pays.
of the word.
Oh, okay.
That concept.
That was not clear to me. I just suggest some editing on that. But the other thing that I thought was quite good on page 4 is the suggesting that detailed development come with the implementation, the Delta Plan Implementation Committee. It's in the middle under priority actions to implement the Delta Plan, and I thought that was well stated. So I'm ready to go on.
Okay.
That's the only
Could
observation.
we hang on just for a second?
Yes, sir.
We've had some chats about this on the phone recently, too. Just to give you a better idea, perhaps, of what I really have in mind in terms of criteria and how they can be useful. On the first one, on page 2, it says improve the reliability of California's water supplies. We've got 3 bullets after that. Just take a couple of these as an example for what I'm trying to convey. Instead of improve, the first word, why don't we put strengthen? And again, this is not per se, but just supposed to be the type of work that sort of thinking that you should be undergoing now. And at the end of it, it says we should do this, and that's all fine, but it doesn't really give us a start date, or it doesn't tell us where to start. So instead of stopping with these areas at the end of that first bullet, put in where start with those assessed to be the weakest. If we're going to strengthen, we're going to work on the weakest. And another criteria you probably would apply is, whose failure would cause the greatest economic damage. And I'm calling it economic damage because that's, or else you can say damage, but we're trying to quantitate that a little bit as well. On the next one, reduce vulnerabilities, et cetera, that prevent timely repair and maintenance. And there maybe start with the easiest to remove and the one with the biggest impact. Again, to try to give you a jumping off point by applying a couple of criteria. And the third one, through the integrated regional water management program, again, start with the one that gives you the biggest bang for the buck. But not a real fine point on all this, but you put a sharper point on it. Any other examples? On the next page, page 3, the one that Chairman Phil was talking about, protect the Delta as a place. The first bullet, improve safety in the Delta through emergency preparedness planning and diversifying the funds. How about submit an emergency preparedness plan by a certain date?
Okay, thank you. Very good.
And, it goes on and on. If you try to apply criteria that will help you decide when to start, where to start, and what to do, that's really what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think we've tried to make that step, but you've brought up a lot of good points that I think will strengthen the product as we move forward. The third attachment for your staff report, what we've started to do, and again, it's kind of a matter of what sort of presentation makes the most sense. In the cover memo, obviously, it's very qualitative, as you're pointing out, and kind of vague in some ways. And then what we have started to do is build this spreadsheet to build in some of those details to begin to look at example projects and priorities and programs that feed into these strategies. We haven't gotten to that level yet of detail, being able to say what gives us the most bang for the buck, the full list of projects and programs. But I think it's the direction we're headed in. And one of the things we wanted to do, really our primary request for today, was to have you just give us a sense of, are these products moving in the right direction? We're trying to get to back in those details, but I think your comments really do give us some guardrails as to, in the full suite of things, we should be asking these types of questions. So
make sure you know where the boundaries of the forest are before you get down in the weeds.
Yes. Yeah.
And the spreadsheet is after the blue divider in that same
of
section?
course. Yes. It's the very last one before agenda item 8. And it's,
There are a
again,
couple of charts in here. The first is the departmental category of current spending, then follows the fold-out chart
right, so it's
that
very
the staff
large
has
one.
been developing, and there's also the Delta Conservancy memo in here.
Do
Yeah.
you want comments on the fold-out or
Sure.
not?
Yes, absolutely.
Now you want it, or you want it later?
Are you?
I'd suggest you go through this in some order so we don't shift back and forth between documents.
Yeah, it might make more sense if we can run through the attachments and order, and then it gives you a sense of the tools we're working with, and then we could talk about where to go from here with them.
Mr. Chairman, could I provide a little context
Yes,
to this
please.
discussion? One of the things that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about these near-term actions is it's the family of agencies working in the Delta that are going to perform those actions. And we're not in the position to dictate to any of them what actions they're going to do. We have a role in this circumstance of encouraging and facilitating work that they want to do, and that's really what these actions are. So a lot of what we have been working on in the time since we last talked is to have conversations with those agencies and get their agreement that this is something that is in our mutual interest. It's something that by doing this and presenting projects, moving from strategies to more specific projects, that it's in everyone's benefit and that we can actually facilitate accomplishment within the Delta at a faster pace. But that does require a little time in order to get that coordination accomplished and to give those agencies the time they need to give us that information, which is why in the package you have right now, it's incomplete.
Yeah.
It's an idea mostly of the direction that we're taking, but our expectation is that it'll take us about a month to get that to a situation where it's more reflective of, I think, what your desire and the council's desire has been, to have a more specific list of projects, something that has costs, timelines, start dates. That is what we're after, but that does take a little bit more time.
I think it's well done. I think we're looking to show a little bit of leadership too, and
Right.
to try to give a hint of direction without pushing people to do certain things, and to show that things are moving. That we are getting some stuff done, and we are playing a role in getting it done.
Totally agree.
Chris, in response to that, as you're developing this work product, there are a couple of things that I think need to be added that are critical. One is you've listed the lead agency, but there are multiple agencies involved in these, and if we're going to be coordinating, we need to know who we need to coordinate. The second thing that's lacking is what science disciplines come to bear on a particular project. Is it a geologist? Is it a fish biologist? Is it a hydrologist? Is it all of these? Each project needs to be defined as lead agency, ancillary agencies or related agencies, and then the science disciplines that should be brought to bear to help develop an adaptive management program up front.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent point. And I think one of the things that we've been looking at and been discussing with the other agencies on the implementation committee side of this is how do we present and engage the other agencies in a visible way. And the implementation committee is an obvious place, I think, to vet these projects in a more public way and to tie in adaptive management and identify that and have that as a realistic expectation of those projects, and that we use the implementation committee actually as another sounding board for the results of those studies. So this stuff is really interwoven and is fairly complicated, even though the idea, and I don't want to lose the simple idea of we need to get something done quickly and make it effective, is what we're after initially. But there are many other steps along the way that we're also pursuing.
Ms. Gray.
Thank you. Is there some consideration as to, would timing be a consideration when you look at priority? I know the near-term actions are 5 to 10 years, but would it be a criteria where you would look at which projects would be completed sooner than later, or is it all about just the fact that the substance of the project?
It's going to be a mixture of things. I think our goal on this has got to be aimed at getting work done quickly, but work that matters. If we're sweeping sidewalks and that's a project, we may be able to get that done very quickly, but it may not matter at all to the Delta. So obviously we want to do something that has some substance that actually affects the ecology, affects the reliability of water supply, and improves Delta as a place. So that's going to be a huge criteria, but at the same time it's going to be balanced by simple logistical considerations. And the other thing that's come out of this discussion is people want some initial successes. They want some demonstration that, in fact, we can get something done. So in that circumstance, perhaps the initial projects are going to be things that are as effective as we can make them, but will be completed as soon as possible so that we have a demonstration of effect.
Yeah, and that's my point. I would think that every project has some substance.
Yeah.
But I would think that people are looking for successes, so therefore you would look at projects that can be completed quicker than later.
Especially in the near term, yes.
Exactly.
Let me raise a dissenting voice. When we've been talking about prioritizing the projects and the programs, it's really been on the impact on water reliability or the environment and the importance of them. And a lot of those are longer term, but that doesn't mean it can't be broken into stages.
Right.
If you have, say, 5 or 6 stages, and you can say stage 1 is going to be finished by X date, an actual month, week, and a day as opposed to a season, and we meet that or beat it, then that's something we can point to with a lot of pride.
Well taken.
And
yes.
augurs well for the future.
Yeah, one of the things I learned from reading this information you distilled from our cross-cut budget, which has been going on for more than 10 years through CalFed Bay Delta, is that, man, there's a lot of smaller but still significant dollars being spent, but it's hard to figure out whether it's pursuant to a coherent plan or individual agency decisions and in what way it fits together and works together. But you go through this and you find references to, for example, the Delta Fish Agreement, a 1986 agreement with Fish and Game and the Department of Water Resources. It was called the Four Pumps Agreement, was developed out of a perceived particular problem. Well, that's now continued and gets money for a period of time. That's the kind of thing you want to see, cross-agency agreements to proceed with activities being monitored. But Hank's point, I think, is even more important. I think we tend, when we just do dollar figures, to assume that money being earmarked or money spent is the accomplishment when it's not. And Hank's point is it's the outcome, a more reliable water system, an improved Delta ecosystem. It is not simply the identification of money or the earmarking of money or even the spending of money. It's the actual outcome. That's the difference in the Delta Stewardship Council's duties to the cross-cut budget assembly from CalFed Bay Delta, which is just saying how much money is being spent in the Delta, who's spending it for what, which is okay, but that's just the starting point.
Right, and that's the principal thing that we need to modify, I think, in the cross-cut budget spreadsheet that you see there. It's got a lot of great information that really does demonstrate that a lot of things are going on right now in the Delta, but what it doesn't have are the specific performance actions and outcomes, and we can add that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I might, if I'd had this chart at our last meeting when the McCormick-Williamson stuff was being discussed, I might have gone to the Fish and Game $3 million or something like that was marked for McCormick-Williamson and said, well, you got money. I mean, you got money last year. Now, I suspect a lot of this money is for what's called capturing funding, a odd phrase that means we're putting up some money in the hopes that somebody else will give us more money? Is that what it means?
No, we talked to DWR and Fish and Game because that's the reports we presented at this
Right.
council meeting. And it's a interesting way to phrase it, but it really just means it's money they have that they've been expending on that particular, whether it's a project or it's a staff position to carry out some sort of
Are
activity.
they spending it?
In some, yes, yep, or they have spent it.
Goes to
In
show
some
you.
cases, we go back in
I
time.
I would never have
know.
understood that from
That's
the
why we asked.
phrasing in here.
Right. So I did verify with them. It simply means expenditures or money they have already spent. So.
Okay. How about getting to Mr. Nordhoff's question on the fold-out attachment 3,
Okay.
the draft list of projects and programs. 7C section, attachment 3.
Sure. Well, as the name suggests, attachment 3 is a preliminary list of projects and strategies. It's based on contacts that we've had over a period of about 2.5 weeks with other agencies. These are projects and programs that staff thinks would have some merit and could be included in a list of this sort. But we need to vet these things with the people who are actually going to be doing the work and make sure that they are compatible with their priorities. It's definitely a work in progress. The intention here is to give you the kinds of information that we are looking for, that we're asking for, the kinds of projects that we're proposing for consideration to the other agencies, and to give you a snapshot of where we are right now. Obviously, it's incomplete, hence all the question marks in some of these categories.
So this will be more complete in another month or so?
Yes, and more complete a month after that, et cetera. What we plan to do is use this as a vehicle for ramping up the implementation committee. Basically have discussions and reviews with the implementing agencies. What we'd like to do is get it down to a manageable group of projects. I don't think it's reasonable to follow all 400 plus projects that are in the...
I'm in favor of coordinating with other agencies. We're statutorily required to do it. I do not think, however, that agencies which currently and for as long as the state has existed have had the authority to cooperate with each other on their own will magically say, oh, God, I didn't realize that this project was more important than my project. I don't believe that. And a tool to focus the discussion in the implementation committee is really the Delta Plan. And to the extent the Delta Plan, and if we have a set of near-term actions are developed, it becomes a way to focus. I mean, I personally think that one of the major accomplishments from the implementation committee would be if you develop a set of recommendations that the governor incorporates in an executive order as a policy of his administration during the remainder of his term. I think that would be useful, not controlling, doesn't overcome statutes, but very useful. It's that lack of picking and choosing and saying do this in the next year or two that leads to this incredible confusion. That's because we're doing so much all at the same time with different people. So I still am of a mind that the near-term project framework is the shaping of the details, and you cannot defer a question like, just for example, should the operations and maintenance of the state water project be just as important or less important than all the other things? If the staff believes and the council believes that upgrading the ability of DWR to maintain its existing water conveyance system is really important, well, hell, we ought to say it. And I know that for other state agencies, that's of a lesser importance. State Lands Commission will have some academic interest in it, but that's not going to be at the forefront of their activity. but it is something that could be achieved relatively easily if the Department of Water, if the State Water Project had a 5-year capital improvement plan or an operations and maintenance plan, which they, best I can tell, do not have, and if they had authority to hire and retain staff needed to repair the equipment and machinery. It's a subject that's been much discussed, including here, by the DWR, but the current budget crisis and the two governors' freezes of hiring and salary competition has meant that we are hobbled in repairing machinery and equipment because that high-level technicians that do it are being attracted by all the local water agencies and private companies at a higher salary. Now, that's either something you solve or you don't solve. And I just see, all I'm saying to you is this document cannot punt everything, including a concept, to the implementation committee. There ain't nothing to implement unless you have a clear programmatic vision, a framework, I think, as you guys call it.
In thinking of the kind of role that the council would play in this, I see ours as being one of coordination, collaboration, perhaps emphasis, taking a much broader view of the entire area, whereas some of these might have a little narrower view, and trying to put some together, to consolidate where we can.
Good.
And, through leadership, try to emphasize some and in the process de-emphasize others in terms of funding. Again, with an overall view of things.
Excellent points. I would point out that the last column on attachment 3 is a reference back to the Delta Plan and how this action or project or program would help implement the Delta Plan.
And I think it may be just a problem with the format of this, but for example, on page 3, where you talk about ecosystem restoration, this is the part of it that was more easy for me to understand, because you started off, I think, with an overarching category, ecosystem restoration, restore 8,000 acres of intertidal and associated habitat. It was not immediately clear to me that the things that appeared under it were options to achieve that. But it is the identification of the basic approach, the parameters, the 8,000 acres or whatever it is in a 10-year period, that then allows you to go to an implementation committee and say, look, there's the goal. Here are 3 or 4 or 5 examples: Prospect Island, McCormick Track, Liberty Island's down there somewhere, Dutch Slough. And that's a matter, that's where an implementation committee really works. But without that first hard, cold, clear parameter for ecosystem or water reliability or Delta's Place, it's hard to figure out what it is. That's the value I think the council can make. The implementation committee hopefully can cobble together agencies who, some reluctantly, others quite willingly, say, yeah, that structure makes sense. Let's argue about the details under the structure. That's what I'm hoping to get.
I think once we get a lot of these projects filled in a little bit with a little bit more substance, we've got a couple of options on how to go about prioritizing it. Mm-hmm. The council could do it, the implementation committee could do it, or we could enlist the science community to give us an unbiased perspective on how to do that. So we have some options here, and I just don't want us to get ahead of ourselves too soon on this, because I think it's going to become clear as we get the projects and how they fall out, and it may be that a lot of these things are items that have a natural priority to them anyway, and it may not be that big a deal.
One of the questions I have for you is that as you've contemplated the implementation committee's activities, you have a particular project that's agreed upon as worthy of interest, and it involves multiple agencies with permits and so on. Will the implementation committee be a place where streamlining among the agencies, particularly as it relates to funding and permitting, could be negotiated?
Yeah, I guess I'll grab that one. Absolutely. Yeah. That's something we have been talking about, and it's one of our action items for the implementation committee is, in fact, to look at opportunities for reducing duplication, greater efficiency, sharing resources, all of that sort of thing that I think, to the public, I think is obvious, and they assume that we would do that anyway. And of course, we don't. And so I think it's a role that the implementation committee can serve that doesn't exist right now.
As you develop the talking points moving forward, I think that's a key one.
Right.
And it needs to be up front, and that's, I think, how we add value to the process.
Hank? No. Okay. Hank, you had other questions on that fold-out chart? Okay. Ms. Messer, I think you've got a little slot here for Campbell and the Delta Conservancy with an item. Is this a good time to go to that, do you think?
Sure. Let me just give a little context on this. So
Okay.
as you've heard, we've been in the process since the last council meeting, and actually over the last few months, of going to different agencies. Once we kind of got a handle on at least a rough framework of the information we were trying to collect, and we've been meeting with various agencies and talking with them and saying, hey, can you help us out by providing information, detailed information about your priority programs and projects? And the Conservancy was very gracious in providing us with a very nice, thorough memo that lists their priority actions and programs. And so we wanted to include that. Now we're still working with other agencies. We get information in different ways, but this was just a very nice example of the kind of collaboration that we're undertaking and the kind of feedback that we're getting. I don't know if we want to give Campbell a couple minutes to...
Well, first of all, what date was it written? Because there's no date on it, other than that. I assume this was 9 months ago, right?
No, this is about 3 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's November. All right. I do have one question, Campbell, on this. I read this, an understanding where your board members come from, as saying, look, we like all the projects that have been mentioned in the list of 43 and everything else, but if you want to start somewhere that's consistent with the Conservancy purposes, the items identified on page 1, 2, and 3 are a plausible place to start.
I would agree with that. Should I? Sure.
You got to get up to a microphone. Hit the mic with your hand to see if it's working. It's not. Press a red button, believe it or not. There you
It's
are.
not intuitive at all, is it? No, I would agree with that statement. And I think we tried to focus solely on the restoration projects that were a part of the coalition effort. Mm-hmm. So we took some time to go and talk to each of those proponents and try to identify what their current cost needs are to move those projects forward, and then included them in that packet.
Question, Pat? No.
If I could just direct your attention to one other item in here, and also included in the spreadsheet. We have been convening a Delta Restoration Network that will bring together all of the agencies that will be doing restoration, along with the Delta community, to really start to identify how, when, where, and why we do restoration, how we track all the restoration, how we manage the outreach, how we manage general land management, mitigation, and all those things. So it is a coordination house. We've developed an MOU. We've gotten very good response from the lead agencies that will be doing restoration to participate in this. So I just wanted to highlight that, because so much of what we've talked about today really gets to how are we going to do that into the future. And we're very encouraged by the feedback we've gotten on that.
Yeah, I noted that, and it strikes me as a bit of an overlap or duplication along the lines of what the council has talked about the implementation committee here will be doing. So as we all work towards ultimately the co-equal goals, this is an area where it probably requires some thoughtful consideration to how the two agencies can work closer together.
And we have had conversations with them directly, with the Stewardship Council directly, about how this nests within the implementation subcommittee. And certainly it's really the restoration focus. But it's important to recognize, I think, that what we're looking at is really being the convener of it. I don't see it as a separate effort, but as a place to start to have the discussions that need to happen and that just roll right up into the implementation committee.
But the Conservancy itself is statutorily fingered as one of the implementation delta conservation, protection,
Absolutely.
restoration entities available. I think we're constrained by the mindset that's built up over the last few decades, where everybody positions themselves for the next pending bond issue, so you can say that if you just mention me with a tag of 4.5 million or 17 million in the bond issue, I get my pot protected. And I think over time that it'll still be around, but that's going to be less and less important, and we're searching for new ways to figure out how to coherently spend money other than just waiting for money from heaven to drop on our heads through another bond issue. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Campbell, I'd like to thank you for all the help on this. This has been good.
Most definitely.
Cindy, anything else that you want to bring up under this?
Nope. I think I would just wrap up with next steps, which is interesting because I've heard it now from several council members, which is when we went through this exercise and we kind of said, gee, we keep coming back to these core questions. One is continuing to populate the list and get information, but really it's moving forward about roles and responsibilities, really clarifying and fine-tuning the roles and responsibilities of the council, this implementation committee, the implementing agencies that we will be working with and partnering with, and even as staff, we're taking a look at that as well. So we'll introduce more information on that, I think, as we move forward with this effort. So.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Goodwin, you're last on our agenda, but it